right, America. This is our final segment. Thank goodness, because I'm not sure I could take too much more of me this morning myself. It's amazing. It is amazing. So far, we've talked about Benghazi and the email that ties the White House to a clear and open and blatant act of treason, that of aiding and abetting a sworn and known enemy of the nation. That would be Al-Qaeda, aided and abetted by the White House, the Pentagon, and Congress, and the State Department, and directly herself, Hillary Clinton, as they sold and transferred weapons to a sworn known enemy called Al-Qaeda. That's the real cover-up, folks. In our second segment, we talked about the hate speech law that is fascism defined. And in our segment that just passed, we talked about the police state and how SCOTUS has green-lighted the indefinite detention of Americans and has set the stage for the coming purge, the putsch that will come. The Republic is dead. Long live the Banana Republic. In this segment, we're going to look at the EPA chief, Gina McCarthy, and how she is rejecting claims that their science is commissioned. They call it secret science. And it is. The EPA administrator, she is claiming that it's an unfair statement that the agency is relying on, quote, secret science. That was the phrase used in one of the hearings that she was involved in, to impose regulations on air and water pollution. She should be charged and held right now and convicted of perjury and thrown in prison for that statement, because it is secret science. One, there's no peer review. Two, they won't even release it to the public. So how can there be a peer review if there's no release to the public? If there's no release to the scientific community? In fact, they won't release the secret science to Congress. Hello? We have this science that proves this, and we're passing rules and regulations based upon that. Okay, can we see the science? No. But we're Congress. We're the ones who have to approve of what you're doing. It makes no difference. You can't see the science. You just have to trust us. Okay, can we have other scientists take a look at it? Because we know we're just a bunch of buffoons in white suits up here. So we realize that we're not scientists at heart, and we probably wouldn't understand all that complicated thinking. So why don't we just have some other scientists peer review it? No. Well, how are we supposed to make a determination if we're Congress and we have to approve what you're trying to do, Ms. EPA? It doesn't make any difference. You're just going to have to trust us. Really? You mean to tell me you're going to move another 1/6 of America's economy based on the secret science, the secret squirrel science nobody's allowed to see, no peer is allowed to review, based on Gina McCarthy's promise that it's legitimate? Gina McCarthy, the one who can't tell the difference between a neuron and a moron? She says that science is the EPA's North Star. She goes on to say, if the EPA is being accused of secret science because we rely on real scientists to conduct research and independent scientists to peer review it, and scientists who have spent a lifetime studying the science to reproduce it, then so be it. However, that's not true. What is true is that the primary author of the United Nations IPCC which is their global climate change body that is studying global climate change, global warming, climate change. You can call it whatever acronym you want, but basically it's all the same thing. And he just came out yesterday and said that the summary that all of these governments, including our government and the EPA and the Department of State and all these other agencies, are relying upon was manipulated by politicians themselves, not for accuracy, but to meet their agenda. This is the main author. And he's a Harvard guy. He's not, some right-wing kook. He's a left-wing kook. David Schweikert from Arizona introduced legislation a couple of months ago. And that legislation is designed to prohibit the agency from proposing or finalizing any rules regarding Clean Water and Clean Air Act. This is the one where the EPA is trying to take over personal property, private property, without first disclosing all of the, quote, scientific and technical information, end quote, that they are relying on as the source of their rationalizing and reason, right? The Secret Science Reform Act, which is what he's called this, was proposed in response to the EPA approving regulations, quote, that would have placed a crippling financial burden on economic growth in the country with no public evidence to justify their actions, right? Well, I already did a whole segment on this secret science crap once before. And there is absolutely no denying the fact that McCarthy and her crew, sponsored, brokered, promoted by this administration, are not willing to expose or put forth any of this information for a peer review. They won't. They won't even release it. McCarthy says the secret science argument is a worn-out argument. Well, guess what? We heard the same thing from President Barack Obama when he said there's not even a smidgen of evidence that the IRS did something wrong. And yet you got Lois Lerner out there with emails that prove otherwise. There's no terrorist involvement here at all in Benghazi. This was all about a film. In fact, I wonder why when I watch the mainstream media and the press, who everybody keeps throwing these timelines out, and they say, well, a week after, what's-her-face was still out there talking on the talk shows, and hey, guess what? 2 weeks after, the president himself went and stood in front of the United Nations, in front of God and all man on the planet, and he made the statement that it was not a terrorist attack. So everything up until that point is moot. And since he knew well before the 2 weeks was up, McCarthy goes on to say, these critics are playing a dangerous game by discrediting the sound science our families and our businesses depend on every day. You can't just claim the science isn't real when it doesn't align well with your political or financial interests. Now, the truth is, Senator David Vitter from Louisiana comes out and says, EPA's leadership is willfully ignoring the big picture and defending the EPA's practices of using science that is, in fact, secret due to the refusal of the agency to share the underlying data with Congress and with the American public. You see, it doesn't really matter what the EPA says they have because they won't let anybody see it. Now, I don't care whether you want to, quantify that as secret science or whether you want to quantify that as uncooperative or how you want to quantify that. I'm telling you right now that anytime a government agency is going to modify our economy and take away personal and private property rights and have absolute dictatorial control over the lives and the businesses of Americans across the nation, you better have more than some scientific reports that you refuse to actually allow us to see. Or are we going to fall for the Obamacare debacle again? I posted something on AVN this morning that is a report that came back that said that under the current regulatory regime that we are living under right now, I want you to understand something. And this is very important stuff. The United States right now, the cost of implementing all of the regulations from every one of these extra constitutional agencies that has no authority to exist under the Constitution at all, and is actually acting in open, blatant treason against the best interests of the nation and America all collectively together, is the equivalent cost of the 10th largest economy on the planet Earth. What? Yes. The cost of implementing the regulations of these tyrannical monsters, these Frankenstein freaks, is equivalent to the 10th largest economy on the planet. Ladies and gentlemen, I mean, you've got to be kidding me. You see, what this really is a willful and intentional. They're and they're sucking the resources out of the country. The goal of this is to strip America of its ability to defend itself, first peacefully in the courts, and secondly with guns and bullets when it comes to that. That's what it's about. So just get it through your head. Acknowledge it. You're a dead man walking. You're a dead woman walking. They've already planned your demise. The only difference is you just don't know when the bullet's coming your way. And mark my words, I don't mean in some kind of an illusory manner. I mean literally. If you speak out, if you are one that is unwilling to stand and play ball their way, mark my words, they've got a mark for you. So the regulatory tax, according to this article, and it's from investors.com, I mean, this is not some, quack outfit, tops $1.86 trillion. Just for the record, by the way, Canada's entire GDP is only $1.8 trillion. So our regulatory burden alone exceeds the entire GDP of Canada. There are 200 and some odd countries on the planet. 200 and I think it's 210. I mean, it changes from time to time. Let's just call it 200. So, essentially, if there are 200 countries and our regulatory burden is equal to the 10th largest economy in the world, that means that there are 190 countries that have gross domestic product earnings less than just our regulatory burden alone. Just the penalties we pay to keep these pieces of trash in a job. Let me tell you something, folks. It ain't about clean water and it ain't about clean air. That has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with power. It has everything to do with the ability for them to strip you of the resources so that you are helpless, blind, naked, and afraid. That's what this is about. Make them scared. Leave them stripped. Leave them pummeled and bruised. And they will capitulate. And they're doing that. They're doing that with the EPA. They're doing it with the IRS. They're doing it with the FCC. They're doing it with the USDA. They're doing it with the FTC, the FDA. They're doing it with the SEC. They're doing it with the ATF. Don't you smell it? Don't you see it? This isn't just where there's smoke, there might be fire. You're standing here, the house is fully inflamed, fully engulfed, and you're standing in the living room. And you're standing there with a cup of water trying to pretend that if I spill this over my head, it'll save me. sorry, but it won't. We have reached the breaking point. We have reached the tipping point. The America you knew, that you loved, that you thought you understood, that you believed in, is no longer here. The truth is, we're now some third world dictatorship. And we're wearing the scraps of our royal robes and pretending that they're really not scraps. They're not rags. We are in denial as a nation, as individuals, that we have lost our republic. We are in denial. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the worst form of treason because it is self-treason. Because nothing that you have and nothing that you can generate, nothing that you can keep, nothing you own, none of it is worth it. None of it is lasting, and all of it will be lost anyway. See, it's already lost. They're just letting you hold it for a while. Here's the only saving grace that we have going forward. You know, like, how many of you have been through the 12-step program because you've had an addiction in your life of some form or another? And maybe you haven't, but, and I've not, but the 12-step program has a couple of basic foundational principles that you have to understand in order to move down the plan. There's 12 steps, but you have to go through steps 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 in that order. And essentially, the first step is that first and foremost, you have to acknowledge that you have a problem. And without that acknowledgement, none of the rest of it makes any sense. None of it has any bearing on anything. First and foremost, you must acknowledge that your life is out of control, personally. And in this case, the first and foremost thing that we have to do is admit that our nation has been lost to us, and we are no longer in control. We need to stop fooling ourselves, feeding ourselves fantasy. And then we need to make the determination that nothing that we have, nothing we can possess, not even our very lives themselves, are worth holding on to if the end result, if the end cost, if the end game is our enslavement. Forget our children. Forget our grandchildren. I will not live in that world. I will not live in chains. I will not live under the tyrannical demands and threats of people who I cannot respect. I know to be traitors. I know to have no moral fiber, no backbone, no integrity, no honor, no courage. And if that's not enough for you, then you can bring your kids into it. And your grandkids into it. And the grandkids that you'll never know. Because I'm telling you that when this republic falls, it will go on for ages. How many generations will live under that tyranny? I don't know. Look at the Soviet Union. 1917 is when they kicked it off. It lasted until 1990s. 70 some odd years? How many generations grew up. And how many generations will it take, even from 1990s when the Soviet Union imploded, if you want to call it that, and it didn't really, by the way. I mean, all it did was take on a different form. It put on a different coat and called itself something different. But it's the same dagnab Soviet Union it always was. Jinping from China, same crap. Oh, we're the new China. Bunk. You're the same communist dictatorship you've always been. And all we're doing is joining the ranks of tyranny. We're no longer fighting it. We've taken up the adage, if you can't beat them, join them. How many generations will it take for Americans to say, we've had enough? And our forefathers, our ancestors, didn't have the courage, the fortitude to stand up. Here's the saving grace. James Madison said this to us in 1787. Here's what he said. America, united with a handful of troops, or without a single soldier, exhibits a more forbidding posture to foreign ambition than America disunited with 100,000 veterans ready for combat. Let's hear that again and think about it. America, united with a handful of troops, a handful of Americans who have made the pledge to put my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor on the line to preserve and defend that which I have, that which I plan to give on as my legacy, as my hereditary choice, as my torch of liberty to pass on to those who come after. I owe that for my benefits. I owe that. That's the price. That's the price that I have to pay for all that I have had. And if you welch on that bet, America, if you welch on that bet, America, there's a special place on the other side for you. America united with a handful of troops, read patriots, or without a single soldier, exhibits a more forbidding posture to foreign ambition. Washington, D.C. is a foreign enemy right now. Than America disunited with 100,000 veterans ready for combat. So drop your racial arguments. Drop your arguments about gay, straight, purple hair, green hair, Hispanic, white, black. Put aside your religious differences and stop telling me, well, that church over there says we can't drink wine. Shut up, punk! Realize the greater problem is you're about to die. And that guy sitting over there in that church is your brother. You better adopt the military mentality that says, out here, we're all brothers. And shut off the indoctrination box. You can sit there and you can keep playing these games, these division games, and you can be an America disunited. Or you can become an America united with a handful of loyal Americans without a single soldier amongst us. And we can exhibit a more forbidding posture to the foreign enemy of America, Washington, D.C., and your state capital, I might add. Make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, they are not excluded from the tyranny. Or we can be disunited. And we can lose our nation. been listening to America's Voice now. Time to wake up and have a serious conversation with your mirror.